Today, we're diving into the story of a nation's descent into absolute madness, led by one of modern history's most brutal and, frankly, most bizarre dictators. We're going to uncover the deeply unsettling reign of Francisco Macías Nguema, the first president of Equatorial Guinea. It's a story you've probably never heard, but one you definitely won't forget. During his 11-year rule, from 1968 to 1979, his country earned a horrifying nickname, the Dachau of Africa. I mean, just let that sink in for a moment. That's not a comparison you get lightly. It tells you everything you need to know about the sheer terror that was unfolding there, a direct parallel to one of the darkest chapters of the 20th century.
And this number, this shows you the scale of the horror. 80,000. Now, out of a population of only about 300,000 people, an estimated 80,000 were killed. That is more than a quarter of the entire nation. It just begs the question, how on earth could one man do this to his own people?
So, this is the guy, Francisco Macías Nguema, and looking at this photo, taken the year he came to power, you might not see it, right? He doesn't look like a monster. He looks like any other head of state from that era. And that brings us to the central question. How did this happen? How did this man rise to power and unleash such unimaginable terror?
Well, to answer that, we have to rewind a bit, because his story isn't what you'd expect. He wasn't some charismatic revolutionary or a military genius. Nope, his rise to power was far, far stranger. What's really striking about his early career is just how unremarkable it was. I mean, the guy failed the civil service exam 3 times. He finally scraped by, with a little help, and became a low-level clerk. But then, in the 1960s, the Spanish colonial rulers saw him as someone they could easily control, someone pliable. So they put him on the fast track. He went from being a nobody to a mayor, then a minister, all setting him up to win the country's first, and as it turned out, its only free election.
But here's the wild part. The warning signs were there all along, flashing bright red. At a conference in Madrid, he gave this bizarre rambling speech where he actually praised Hitler. He even checked himself into a psychiatric clinic right before the election because he was worried he was mentally unstable. And somehow, astonishingly, the Spanish administration either missed these giant red flags or they just decided to ignore them. In this image, well, it captures all the hope of that moment. Here he is signing the independence document. For the people of Equatorial Guinea, this was supposed to be the beginning of everything, a new era of freedom and prosperity. It's such a powerful, optimistic picture, and it makes what happened next even more of a gut punch.
Yeah, that moment of hope, it didn't last long. Once he had the power, the mask didn't just slip. He ripped it off completely, and the whole world saw the horrific reality of his rule.
He moved fast. By 1972, only 4 years after that free election, he had banned all other political parties. And then he just declared himself president for life. And just like that, democracy in Equatorial Guinea was over.
And his rule wasn't just political. Oh no. It was a full-blown, bizarre cult of personality. He demanded that this phrase, "There is no other God than Macías," become the national motto. He ordered priests to thank him before Mass and had his own picture placed in churches, sometimes with the caption, "God created Equatorial Guinea thanks to Macías." The ego is just unbelievable.
His paranoia led to some of the cruelest and strangest decrees you can imagine. He decided intellectuals were a threat, so he banned the word intellectual and ordered anyone who wore glasses to be executed. He outlawed private schools. He had boats destroyed to stop people from fleeing. He even banned Western medicine. It was like he was deliberately trying to send his country back to the Dark Ages, just to make it easier to control.
The cruelty was often theatrical and just deeply sadistic. This Christmas Eve massacre is one of the most chilling examples. He gathered 186 political opponents in the National Stadium. As they were being executed by firing squad, he had the cheerful pop song, "Those Were the Days," blasting over the speakers. It was a message of pure, terrifying power. The impact on the country was total and complete devastation. The average income plummeted from over $1,400 at independence down to just $70 a few years later. After he had the head of the central bank killed, he literally moved the entire national treasury into his own house, bankrupting the country and forcing the economy back into a barter system.
So what did people do? They ran. By 1978, nearly half of the entire population had escaped the country. Just think about that. 1 out of every 2 people became a refugee just to get away from him. It was a massive brain drain that the nation has never really recovered from.
But here's the thing about a regime built on pure paranoia and violence. It can't last forever. It's just too unstable. And in the end, it was Macías's own spiraling madness that finally brought him down.
According to people who worked for him, in his last years, he barely left his villa. He would just wander the halls, muttering the names of people he'd had killed. He reportedly would order these huge, lavish dinners prepared for his dead enemies, then sit at the table all alone, having conversations with their ghosts. His paranoia had completely and utterly consumed him. The final trigger came when he turned on his own family. After he had several relatives murdered, his nephew, Teodoro Obiang, knew he had to act. Obiang led a coup, and Macías fled into the jungle, but was captured 2 weeks later. He was put on trial, found guilty of genocide, and sentenced to death. But here's one last, bizarre detail. The local soldiers were so terrified of his supposed magical powers that they refused to execute him. They were scared his ghost would haunt them. So the new government had to hire a squad of Moroccan soldiers to carry out the sentence.
But the execution of Macías Nguema wasn't the end of the story, not by a long shot. In so many ways, his shadow still looms over Equatorial Guinea today. And here is the real twist in this story. The man who overthrew the tyrant, his own nephew, Teodoro Obiang, is still the president of Equatorial Guinea today. He's actually the longest-serving head of state in the entire world. So the dictator was removed, but the system of autocratic family rule he created, that remains.
So the legacy he left behind is just profound. A nation crippled by the loss of its educated class, traumatized by the death or exile of a huge part of its people, and an economy in absolute ruins. And politically, the country didn't transition to democracy. It just transitioned to a different autocrat from the very same family.
Macías Nguema's reign was a uniquely bizarre and brutal chapter in modern history. But his legacy leaves us with a really universal and difficult question. When a nation suffers that kind of deep trauma and the structures of power don't really change, what does recovery even look like? It's a haunting question, and it's one that Equatorial Guinea is still living with today.